The leader of the Hezbollah militia in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah, has threatened a fight with no rules if Israel launches a full-scale war against his group. He also said EU member Cyprus would be a legitimate target in any future war if it continues its military cooperation with Israel. The statement followed Israel's announcement that its military has approved a plan for an operation in southern Lebanon.
The latest strikes on Lebanon. Israel and the militant group Hezbollah have been trading cross-border attacks almost daily. Now they have taken steps with the potential for a full-scale conflict. Israel has approved what it calls operational plans for an offensive in Lebanon.
We've made absolutely clear that one way or another, diplomatically or through military means, our northern border, the north of our country, Israeli sovereign territory, will be made safe for Israel's population, Israel's people, to return there.
Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah responded by promising a fight with no rules.
They have to wait for us on the ground, in the air and in the sea. We have said this before, and I will say this again today. If the war's imposed on Lebanon, the resistance will fight without control, without rules and without a ceiling.
The cross-border exchanges of fire began after the October 7 terrorist attack by Hamas. The UN says more than 400 people were killed in Lebanon in such strikes, including dozens of civilians. On the Israeli side, the reported casualties amount to at least 25 soldiers and civilians. Hezbollah says it is ready to de-escalate, but to do so, it wants something that has proven difficult to achieve: a lasting ceasefire in Gaza.
Well, let's examine this with Hanin Ghaddar from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Welcome to the day. Is a full-scale military confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah on the ground, in the air and in the sea, as Hassan Nasrallah put it, is that more likely now?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me. My short answer, and I'll explain, is no. I believe that it's unlikely for the simple reason that both parties do not have an interest in a full-scale war. And just let me explain why. From Hezbollah's side, they have many challenges that make them feel that they cannot afford a full-scale war. One, this is not their war. Their job today is to protect Iran's interests, that is the Iranian regime and its nuclear program. Once the Iranians feel that they are directly threatened, they will use Hezbollah as an insurance policy, or they will unleash them if they feel that it's necessary. This is not the time for Iran/Hezbollah's war. This is Hezbollah wants to keep it calculated, and also they do have military challenges. They do not have the war budget. They do not have the commandments. They do not have a proper commander with a vision that would lead the war, and this is just not their war. On the Israeli side, what's happening today is both parties are trying to reestablish deterrence after months of the conflict. The Israelis are definitely more interested in war, and they have more capabilities to set back Hezbollah. However, there are three important issues for Israel that are deterring them so far from a full-scale war. One, which is the most important one, is that they're still not 100% sure that the U.S. wants another front in the region, another war in the region before the presidential elections in America in November. And this support is needed by Israel in order to launch a war that would look like a tiny war in front of a big Lebanese war that would drag in all the Shiite militias, Iran-backed militias in the region, and could very well develop into a regional war that would drag the U.S. into it, and the U.S. does not want that. So a political military support by the U.S. is a challenge. Two, the Israeli needs to finish Gaza, take a breather, restock, rethink. And today what they're doing, actually, they are targeting Hezbollah without the risk of thousands of precision missiles attacking Israel and causing more displacement. So it's kind of not ideal situation, but I think it's more effective than going into a war. The rhetoric escalation that we're seeing today is more, I think, is to reestablish deterrence and force the other side to stop or to accept a certain compromise or a deal that is proposed by the Americans. It's more of a flexing muscles and showing what can be done in case of a war.
Okay, so this in your analysis, this is about this ceasefire deal that Joe Biden announced to the world a couple of weeks ago. This is positioning.
Exactly. I think this is positioning, this is preemptive measure rather than a reactive measure. This is like what Hezbollah is doing, is trying to prevent the war by increasing the rhetorical escalation. They are trying to say that we haven't used everything that we have. We haven't targeted everything that we can target. And today he added Cyprus to the list. But it's not really just about Cyprus. It's really about the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's really about Europe. It's like he wants this pressure to push the Europeans and the international community to put more pressure on Israel in order, because Hezbollah feels that the Israelis are becoming more serious about a war, that they are starting to believe that Israel might actually escalate, maybe not a full-fledged war, but a real escalation. And they have suffered a lot of damages. They cannot afford for this war to continue because this opportunity. Lebanon was not targeted before October 7th. Syria was a different scenario where it was open for Israeli military attacks every day, assassinating commanders, IRGC, Hezbollah. Lebanon was a red line for everyone. Right. Today, this has changed. The Syria scenario moved to Lebanon, and Lebanon is an open field. And Hezbollah is suffering a lot of military damage, assets, personnel, commanders, infrastructure, weapons, etc. So they need to reestablish deterrence to stop this.
Right. Well, let's hope you're right. Thank you so much for talking us through that. Hanin Ghaddar from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a closer look at these developments. Randa Slim is a Lebanese-American foreign policy specialist from the US-based Middle East Institute. Welcome to DW. So we've heard this threat then from Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. He's warned Israel to be ready for his forces on the ground, in the air and in the sea if Israel launches a war in Lebanon. Is this rhetoric, or is an all-out war a real possibility?
I have been following Nasrallah's speeches since October 7, and he has given many of them. And this is the first time that I really was alarmed by the tone, partly because it came on the heels of a message conveyed by U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein to the Lebanese government, and then from them relayed to Hezbollah, that if there is no cessation of hostilities on the Israel-Lebanon border within the next 4 to 5 weeks, then Israel will organize engage in a what's called limited operation. And we don't know how limited it is, whether it's only limited to the southern region of Lebanon, near the border with Israel, or whether it is going to involve attacks on the capital, Beirut, other parts where Hezbollah has, major presence. And I think the message of Nasrallah yesterday was very much a reply to this message, that if Israel were to decide to do this incursion in Lebanon, or this attack on Lebanon, then there would be no rules, no limits, no boundaries to Hezbollah's reaction. Hezbollah has been trying to deter Israel since it started its war of support of the Palestinians in Gaza. And it has been escalating, in a tit-for-tat pattern with Israeli action, but all the time wanting to prevent a all-out war. And it looks like we might the timeline is not helping them anymore.
And do we presume then that the Israeli threat is a credible one, fighting on two fronts, in Gaza and in Lebanon?
The timeline is interesting because the message that was conveyed by the US envoy to Lebanese authorities is that if this is going to happen, it's going to be within the next 4 to 5 weeks. And this is supposedly when Israel is presumed to have finished with most of its operation in Rafah. And then it can turn more of its attention and its resources to the northern border. So is it credible? I mean, it was conveyed by a US envoy, and the timeline seemed to align itself with where the war in Gaza is going.
Hezbollah, of course, part funded by Iran. If a full-blown war with Israel were to break out, what do you expect the Iranian response would be?
Well, I mean, depending on what kind of operation, again, Israel does and whether Hezbollah can withstand that kind of assault or not. I don't think Iran will intervene if Hezbollah can take care of itself and will be able to repel whatever advance, whatever operation that Israel will organize against Lebanese territory. I think the red line for Iran has always been any existential threat to Hezbollah, like it has been also in in Palestine, any existential threat to Hamas. And so I think as long as that the situation does not create an existential threat to Hezbollah, Iran will not intervene. Hezbollah will be able to take care of itself and of its defense. And
Lebanon has always been this strange creature with Hezbollah acting as an army within the Lebanese state. So does the Lebanese government just look on and watch this happen in its own land?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. And I think all the decision of war and peace now have been in the hands of Hezbollah for some time, including, for example, in 2011-12, when Hezbollah decided to send its troops to Syria to help prop up the Assad regime, when at the time that the Lebanese government made a decision to disassociate itself from the Syrian war. So yes, war and peace decision have been in the hands of Hezbollah for some time in Lebanon.
Thank you so much for guiding us through that so clearly. Randa Slim from the US-based Middle East Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we can now get a broader perspective on these developments and welcome Katrina Sammour. She's with the Emirates Policy Center. That's an independent think tank. Ms. Sammour joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Welcome to DW. Now, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has ramped up the rhetoric. We heard it there. Is this just saber-rattling or a threat to be taken very seriously?
We need to also consider that not only Nasrallah has been raising the rhetoric, but also the Israeli government has been raising the rhetoric when it comes to South Lebanon and the Hezbollah attacks on the north of Israel. What they're both are trying to do, they're trying to raise the rhetoric to de-escalate the situation, basically to raise the alarm of a possible war that they both would try to avoid. It is very interesting to look that Nasrallah's speech came after a video footage was released from their recon drones, which was a clear message that Hezbollah has access, their drones have access to sensitive Israeli military facilities and locations. And it was a clear message that Hezbollah is still committed to rules of engagement and is choosing not to escalate. And the same thing with Israel, when they say that they have a plan to engage in South Lebanon, it is not a declaration of war. We need to remember that. It is just an approved plan by the military. So both parties are trying to avoid a wider conflict. Nasrallah is also trying to create more pressure in Israeli society on Bibi's government to reach a ceasefire agreement and also to relieve some of the pressure on Rafah and Gaza for the Hamas members that are operating there still.
Something
So
that
it
raised,
is.
sorry to jump in there, but something that raised eyebrows in the EU especially was Nasrallah's threat to attack Cyprus if it opened its airport and bases to Israeli forces. Is that a realistic possibility, a realistic scenario if those two were really to clash?
Look, the war in Gaza has changed a lot of dynamics in the Middle East, and I don't believe there will be a full confrontation or attack on Cyprus, for example. But it could affect its shipping, it could affect its trade and diplomatic and economic relations with the region. If we see the patterns of Iran mobilizing its proxies in groups, it happened on a very gradual way, in a very gradual way. So we saw the Houthis escalate and escalate in the Red Sea. Hezbollah has escalated in South Lebanon, and the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq have escalated with time. So we cannot just assume that this is going to be like Hezbollah engaging with Cyprus or attacking Cyprus. We need to look at the wider context and basically the geography of the region and where Cyprus fits in. So for me, a real possibility would be influencing or affecting Cyprus trade and shipping.
Yeah, you mentioned Iran there. Hezbollah is, of course, in part funded by Iran. Now, you say a full-blown war is not in anybody's interests at this point, but things can get out of control. And how would you expect Tehran to behave were there to be a wider conflict?
Tehran and Iran is not going to engage directly in a war with Israel, because that means if Iran engages, that means the United States engages. That means the UK will engage. It will not want to have a full-blown confrontation with Israel and Israel's allies affecting its wider project in the Middle East. But as we've seen with the Houthis, the PMF in Iraq, and with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran will mobilize through its proxies. So we will need to look at the moving pieces in the region and how will Iran use them to lend support to Hezbollah, mainly through supply routes through Iraq and Syria. Which means then if you want to engage with Hezbollah and you're gonna or have a wider conflict with Hezbollah, you will need to target their supply routes, which means you will target Syria, you will target Iraq, bringing the region again into a wider conflict. Leaving countries like us, Jordan, again on the forefront of these regional conflicts and putting our national security at threat.
A scenario that many where you are and where we are trying to avoid. That was Katrina Sammour from the Emirates Policy Center think tank. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get some analysis now with Makram Rabah. He's an assistant professor of history at the American University of Beirut. Welcome, sir. How do you read Nasrallah's comments? Is it a warning shot, or does Hezbollah actually want war with Israel?
I genuinely believe that Nasrallah's statement yesterday reflects that of a drowning man who's trying to scare people into accepting that he has the ability to take on one of the most advanced armies in the region. The problem is that many of Nasrallah's claims rest on the fact that he assumes that Israel will launch a full-scale military operation. But if we are to monitor and to analyze what's happening, Israel are surgically removing the threat on its northern border by targeting high-ranking military officials within Hezbollah. If this continues, it is on its own sufficient to cripple many of Hezbollah's abilities. In addition to the fact that Nasrallah is betting that Iran's proxies across the region or across the globe will come to his aid. One has to mention that Nasrallah or his people have been hinting to the fact that Taliban even wanted to join the fight on the Levant. And all this is not realistic given the fact that if such a scenario does occur, Hezbollah will not only be fighting Israel, but it will be fighting the international community as well as the NATO.
You're talking about targeted attacks from Israel against Hezbollah, but many in Israel, not least among the military brass, say it's not a question of if, but when we'll see a full-blown war with Hezbollah. Is that the view in Lebanon as well?
Well, everyone is waiting for the real big war. Unfortunately, while they are waiting for this war, we are in the midst of a different type of war, as I mentioned before. And this is why I think that going forward, Israel will start targeting political assets within Hezbollah, and not only restrict its targets to the south of Lebanon, and even can go far as to attack Hezbollah's civilians' infrastructure. However, a full-scale war identical to that in 2006 is not even on the table for many reasons. First of all, as long as the Rafah operation is ongoing, I don't think that the Israeli army will launch two military operations at the same time. Yet, when we get to the point where the Gaza war is completed, we will have a new ball game and we will have a new playbook. Unfortunately, and this is something that the Lebanese do not understand, that Israel has been preparing for such a scenario on its northern border, and it has more reverence and more respect to Hezbollah's military capabilities, and this is why they will be ready when the time comes, and this will come at the expense of the innocent lives of the Lebanese people.
I wanted to talk about Hezbollah's military capabilities because of this video that Hezbollah released on Tuesday showing apparently a drone footage from over Haifa, and it claims to pinpoint, quote, sensitive Israeli military sites. What does that say about Hezbollah's capabilities, given that Nasrallah just claimed that the group has new weapons as well?
Well, the key word here is claim. Hezbollah and all of this so-called axis of resistance claims that it has technology. I genuinely believe that technology needs democracies. And many of these countries, be it North Korea, Iran, and even Hezbollah, they claim that they have cutting-edge weapons. The fact that they have been able to sneak in a small drone into Haifa doesn't really mean that they have the ability to destroy Haifa. In addition to the fact that such footage and such gimmicks and theatrics from Hezbollah, they give the Israeli army and the Israeli political establishment more reason to get its own people and to mobilize public opinion as well as the Biden administration behind them. Because if any potential attack against Haifa or even against the island of Cyprus, like yesterday's statement with Nasrallah, would also indicate that it will disrupt the maritime activities in the Mediterranean. And this is something that the international community does not want to have a new Houthi threat like the one at the moment in the Red Sea.
The kind of statements that we are hearing from Hassan Nasrallah, is that what Iran wants to hear as well?
Well, at the end of the day, Nasrallah is just a mouthpiece for Iran. I don't tend to agree that Hezbollah has its own mind or can actually operate independently of Iran. And certainly we have seen how the Iranians want a kind of a deal, and they just are trying to wait out the war in hopes that a future democratic administration in Washington, D.C. would allow them to go back to the old system. Whereas, in fact, I think everyone needs to remember that the world has changed after October 7, be it the Lebanon scenario or even the fact that many people have believed that the real threat was the nuclear weapons on the region. Was the recent events have proven that the real threat on the area and on international security are the proxies of Iran, and they will start to deal with this accordingly.
We'll leave it there for the moment, but thanks so much for joining us today. Makram Rabah, Assistant Professor of History at the American University of Beirut. Thank you, sir.